United Kingdom this Thursday pledged beefed-up air defences for Ukraine in a bid to help Kiev stave off Russian attacks on its energy infrastructure. The British Defence Ministry said some $200 million would go to a NATO scheme to buy US weaponry for Ukraine, while Sweden also said that it was announcing a third package of purchases as part of the programme. The announcements came as NATO defence ministers met in Brussels to discuss ramping up their support.
What you see overall is a picture of Canada and Europe stepping up, spending billions more on defense, ramping up the defense industrial base, keeping Ukraine strong. So I think this is very important. We will take stock today and then chart out the course towards our summit in The Hague.
Well, for more on this story, we're joined by Dafyyd Townley, who's a teaching fellow in US politics and international security at the University of Portsmouth. Thank you very much for being with us on France 24. I want to start by talking about these additional announcements from Ukraine's allies. Can these contributions really make a difference on the ground for Ukraine?
Well, they will, especially as the energy grid in Ukraine has been a constant target for Russian attacks since the very start of the invasion in 2022. This is an important step towards continuing support for Ukraine from European members of NATO, obviously filling in something of a backstop that the United States hasn't been committed as much as it has been in the past. And so this is essential for Ukrainian defences that they continue to repel and resist Russian aggression.
Well, we heard a little earlier from Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, and the Ukrainian Defence Minister. They said that Russia's only making incremental advances on the battlefield. But as you say, this comes while Moscow's air campaign is still having a very real impact on Ukrainian civilians. So is this just Russia seeking to have more impact one way if it can't really make much advance on the battlefield?
Well, the one thing that NATO cannot provide for Ukraine is boots on the ground, and that's really manpower. It could be the overall weight that drives Russian victory or Russian progression in the war. So Russia is playing a long game. It's quite happy to have a war of attrition. It knows it has the manpower to see this out over the next 5-10 years, as long as it takes. As far as the air war is concerned, this is a way of demoralizing the Ukrainian population. Certainly, you know, in this period where it's exceptionally cold, having the capacity to impact the ability to heat and generate power across Ukraine is something of a psychological victory for Russia.
Well, meanwhile, efforts to reach a ceasefire through diplomacy continue in the background amidst all of this. The US has been pressuring the parties to come to an agreement, perhaps particularly Ukraine more than anything. Does it have any more tools or leverage, Washington, to force these parties to make a deal?
Well, I think it has more. It can make more of an impression on Ukraine. Certainly, it has the capacity to, for example, like it did last year, withhold strategic intelligence support, which had a significant impact on its ability to resist Russian aggression. We're certainly seeing, the Trump administration has been reluctant to wholeheartedly support Ukraine in the same way that the Biden administration has. However, it is prepared to sell ordnance and armaments to NATO members to provide to Ukraine, but the Trump administration has very much taken a backward step away from the same sort of support. As far as the peace deal is concerned, I think the Trump administration Trump has admitted himself that this is a lot more complex and a lot more difficult than he first thought, and that this is certainly not going to take the 48 hours he first predicted. He's finding it extremely frustrating on both counts, both the Ukrainians and Russians who are being reluctant to make too many concessions, as you would expect in something of this importance.
Well, how has Washington, the Trump administration's policy then on Ukraine affected the NATO alliance? I mean, we know that Trump's threats about Greenland were very poorly received, if we can say that. And is the absence of US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth from this meeting in Brussels symbolic, or does it go further than that?
Well, I think this is symbolic. I mean, we've certainly seen Elbridge Colby, who's the Pentagon policy chief, who is there instead of Hegseth, suggests that the United States wants to go into partnership with NATO rather than be the lead member. We've certainly seen some members of the administration suggest that they would be willing to give up the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe role to, well, one nation was suggested was Germany. I think that was last year. But there is fractures within NATO, but NATO's survived these challenges before in the past. France's withdrawal from the organisation, or its withdrawal of military support in 1967, is another example of a challenge that it's overcome. That said, I think that NATO and members that have coalesced into this coalition of the willing in their efforts to support Ukraine have managed to fill part of the gap that the United States has left. But the NATO is stronger with the United States in it rather than outside of it. That said, there is still a considerable capability within NATO in just its European member states to provide support for Ukraine and for the defense of the alliance, in particular the High North that we're seeing as becoming a much discussed area of concern. So I think that this relationship is brittle at the moment. Whether this is a long-term permanent challenge to the alliance, we'll probably have to wait until that. But certainly, the Trump administration's position is proving difficult for European defense ministers and leaders to navigate.
And on Greenland, NATO's just announced that Arctic Sentry mission there. What is this symbolic? Is this a kind of rebrand for the alliance? And will it be effective in diffusing tensions with Washington?
Well, I think this is recognition from NATO that European members that it wants to, in some ways, keep the United States on side. Certainly by many of the leaders there have recognized that the best way to keep this administration happy is to essentially accept its claims. And it's, certainly the Trump administration has said that Greenland is important for not just US security, but for NATO security. And he's quite right that the High North and the Arctic region is going to be a zone that is going to be contested over for the next 30 or 40 or 50 years as climate change has an impact and releases or makes shipping lanes more available. What we see from NATO is, essentially not a token gesture. This is certainly a commitment. It's something that it didn't have to do in the past. Certainly during the Cold War, the United States took upon itself the land and air defense of Greenland as part of its relationship with Denmark. And so perhaps we're seeing NATO members that are more willing to show the United States that they are capable of operating outside of their own borders or outside of their European continental borders.
All right, Dafyyd Townley from the University of Portsmouth, thank you very much for your analysis.